back to the channel. We're going to talk about how to solder copper tubing today. So first thing is you want to make sure you have all your tools. We have a MAP gas container. I prefer MAP gas. It burns a little bit hotter than propane does. Tubing cutters. We have our copper pipe. Our MAP gas torch. Still a little bit of gas left in there. Our fitting that we're going to solder. We have a copper cleaning tool here. You can also use sandpaper or emery cloth to do the same thing. And then our solder. So this is lead-free silver solder, used for plumbing purposes. If it's not going to be used for potable water, then you can use the leaded solder, which is a little bit more difficult to find, but they do still have it. So the first thing we want to do is to cut our tubing. We'll take this tubing cutter and spin it out to where it slides over the copper tubing. You can see the rollers right here. That tubing should sit on those rollers, and you tighten it down. Now you snug it up and give it a spin, and you should start to see a little bit of a line that's starting to score it. So every so often you just tighten that knob a little bit more so that the cutting wheel, which is right here, goes deeper into the copper. You don't want to be too fast about it, otherwise you could dent the copper, which makes it a little bit more difficult to put the fittings on. So we'll just keep tightening that and spinning it. It finally does cuts. You want to make sure that it does slide onto your fitting, because sometimes you can mangle the ends of that copper tubing to where it does not slide on there very well. So the next thing we want to do is to clean our copper. So this tool has an outside diameter cleaning wire brush, and then an inside one for our fittings. So you can tell very easily that it is polishing up that copper. But this is an important step to this whole process, so that the solder does in fact stick to the copper. So otherwise, if it's tarnished or dirty, it's not going to stick to that copper at all. And basically the rule on this is to just clean it up past where your fitting is going to sit. So we want to clean the inside of our union here. So we got them all scratched up, cleaned, and ready for some flux. Now flux, there's several different kinds. This is tinning flux. The tinning flux has a tendency to etch the copper just a little bit as it heats up, which makes it stick just a little bit better. So you can just make sure you don't get any foreign materials in there. So we'll do the inside of the fitting, and we'll also do the outside of our two cleaned pieces of pipe. And you can go ahead and clean up the extra as it comes out of the joint there. As long as you've got enough all around on both fittings, it should be fine. I prefer the tinning flux myself, but any of the fluxes that are out on the market will work just fine. Alright, so we've got our polished and fluxed joint. We have our silver solder, lead-free silver solder. Not much left on this roll. Should be enough to do this though. So I'm going to apply the heat to the back side of our fitting. and I'll start to put the solder on the front side. The heat is going to attract the solder, and through capillary action, as that solder tries to make it back towards the heat source, it's going to go ahead and fill in this whole joint right here. If you want to touch the whole fitting, feel free to. You don't have to go too excessive with the solder though, because it does tend to pile up inside that joint just a little bit. So you don't want to put too much on, but enough to seal it up. So we'll go ahead and heat it up, and you'll see this tinning flux start to turn kind of a silver color around where we've polished this joint up at. So. So you can see it doesn't take long at all to heat that up and make it warm enough for the solder. You can see it's still hot enough to melt this solder, so that we can actually go ahead and do this other joint without even putting any more heat on it. So, but it's really not that difficult to do. The biggest thing is your prep work. You want to make sure that you get the piece of pipe prepped adequately. Make sure it's cleaned up really well. Apply that flux and make sure it's evenly coated on all pieces that are going to be soldered. And then for potable water or your domestic water, make sure you use the silver lead-free solder. After we've finished and this joint's cooled down, you do want to wipe off all of that flux. The flux is slightly acidic, and because of that, it will eventually start to eat through the pipe. It can take many, many, many years to actually eat through the copper, but it could compromise your joints here. So if you ever look at old copper fittings and see the green around the joints, that means that whoever put that in more than likely didn't wipe off the flux adequately, and that green is the acid in the flux starting to eat away at the copper just a little bit. So, but not too bad to do, fairly easy. I recommend you practice before you just jump in and start redoing the plumbing in your house. So that's about it. So if you have any questions, just drop me a comment. Thanks.
Wow.